So, on August 2, 2026, it actually became illegal in the European Union to just, guess whether you're interacting with a human being or a machine.
Right, the guessing game is basically over.
Exactly. Like if you're reading an article or talking to customer service or, I don't know, looking at a photograph generated by artificial intelligence, the platform serving you that content is now legally mandated to tell you exactly what you're looking at.
Yeah, it's huge.
We've officially crossed this threshold where AI transparency isn't just a best practice or like a polite suggestion anymore. It's the law.
And that single requirement, the labeling, is fundamentally restructuring the architecture of the internet as we speak. I mean, we're watching one of the largest economic blocs on the planet attempt to retroactively engineer trust into this technology that was deployed at just breakneck speed.
Welcome to today's Deep Dive. I'm your host, and I'm sitting down with our resident tech policy expert. Today, we are unpacking a really comprehensive commentary provided in our sources by Dennis Kenji Kipker.
Yeah, it's a fascinating read.
It really is. It maps out the actual on-the-ground reality of the EU AI Act. And, this legislation was mocked a few years ago as being totally premature.
Oh yeah, critics were saying the EU was obsessively building these regulatory fences before the sheep had even arrived.
Right, but then the explosive adoption of generative AI happened and entirely vindicated that foresight. So our mission today is to explore the specific mechanisms of this legislation, from risk management to labeling, and the harsh realities of corporate compliance.
And ultimately, why this isn't just European red tape. We're going to look at how Europe is essentially beta testing global tech governance for the rest of the world.
So let's just dive right in. To understand the sheer gravity of what the EU is attempting here, I feel like we have to look at the deployment speed that kind of forced their hand, right?
Absolutely. Because we are dealing with a dual-use technology that entirely bypassed traditional enterprise testing phases and just went straight to the consumer.
Which is wild.
It is. Kipker's commentary points out that staggering metric we all remember, right? ChatGPT acquired 100 million users in 2 months.
2 months. That speed just breaks every historical model of tech adoption we have. It's like giving the entire global population the keys to a Formula One car overnight.
That's a great way to put it.
Thrilling, obviously, but inherently dangerous if there are no rules of the road. And it's not just the speed that's the issue here. It's the friction created when a dual-use technology crosses international borders without any unified framework.
Right, because companies were primarily driven by self-interest. They deployed these massive language models to maximize productivity and, secure market dominance.
And in doing so, they essentially just bypassed the traditional security audits we normally expect from enterprise software.
Which naturally triggered a corresponding explosion in systemic vulnerabilities. The source material outlines these threats quite specifically.
Yeah, let's go through some of those, because the dark side of this growth is pretty alarming.
Well, for starters, we're seeing severe security flaws integrated directly into critical corporate infrastructure. We're dealing with entirely unresolved copyright issues on a scale that threatens entire creative industries.
And informational industries, too.
Exactly. Plus, you've got rampant, mathematically optimized disinformation campaigns alongside just outright systemic abuse of the technology for fraud.
I'm looking at this list of threats from Kipker, and what strikes me is how different they are from older tech risks, like a traditional software bug. What happens? Your computer crashes.
Right.
But an AI vulnerability, that can subtly manipulate a financial algorithm over 6 months without ever triggering a single system alarm.
Here.
The fundamental nature of the threat is just different because the software is making autonomous inferences.
And that is the core mechanism of the danger right there. When a system operates probabilistically rather than deterministically.
Meaning it predicts an outcome rather than just following a rigid set of hard-coded rules.
Exactly. You can't simply patch a line of code to fix a bias or a security gap. You have to audit the entire training data pipeline. You have to monitor the model's outputs continuously.
Because it's always evolving.
Right. And that is exactly why the EU realized they could not rely on voluntary corporate guidelines. You cannot run a global interconnected digital economy on unpredictable, probabilistic wildcards.
Okay, so what of why regulation is needed? But recognizing a threat is one thing, actually building the regulatory infrastructure to mitigate it across 27 different sovereign nations is another entirely.
It's a monumental task.
The timeline here is aggressive, though. The AI Act officially entered into force in August 2024, which is less than 2 years after the generative AI boom really accelerated.
Yeah, achieving consensus on that timeline required just immense political capital. The EU was actually way ahead of the curve. But entering into force does not mean instant uniform application across the board.
Right, they designed a staggered, tiered rollout based on risk categorization. So let's focus on that first major operational tier, which brings us back to that August 2, 2026 deadline I mentioned at the top of the show.
Yeah.
The new labeling requirements. Let's unpack the reality of this for the listener.
Yeah.
It's easy to mandate a label on a physical piece of hardware, but how does a company technically comply with labeling synthetic digital content at scale?
Well, it requires a massive back-end overhaul. It's essentially akin to introducing nutritional facts to digital media. To comply, companies can't just, add a visual text disclaimer to a video.
Like a little watermark in the corner.
No, that's not enough. They are having to implement deep cryptographic watermarking. They're embedding provenance metadata deep into the file structures of the synthetic content itself.
Oh, wow.
So that browsers, social media platforms, and downstream users can programmatically verify the origin of that media. If an AI generates a deepfake, the digital fingerprint of its creation has to survive compression, editing, distribution, all of it.
So the burden of compliance isn't just on you, the end user, recognizing a watermark. It's on the entire tech stack, preserving that metadata as the file travels across the internet.
Exactly, which explains why this took 2 years to fully implement.
Yeah, that makes sense. But labeling is only meant for transparency, right? It doesn't actually stop a dangerous system from being deployed in the first place.
Oh, it doesn't. That heavier lifting falls under the high-risk category of the legislation. This is the heavy machinery of the AI Act.
Okay, let's get into the high-risk reality. What makes an AI high risk?
It applies to systems that directly impact fundamental human rights, public safety, or critical infrastructure. We're talking about algorithms used in medical diagnostics, biometric identification networks, or systems that manage municipal power grids.
The stuff that really matters.
Right. And the legislation demands end-to-end lifecycle risk management for these applications, from design all the way through operation.
Let's unpack that end-to-end lifecycle risk management, because that sounds like an absolute compliance nightmare for a developer.
It's definitely rigorous.
Like if I'm building an AI to scan and sort resumes for a massive logistics company, I assume that falls under high risk because it impacts employment opportunities. And it could harbor hidden historical biases.
It absolutely falls under high risk. And for that specific use case, the developers must mathematically prove the integrity of their system. They can't just pinky swear that the algorithm is fair.
Right, just trust us.
Exactly. They have to maintain continuous, detailed logging of the data sets used to train the model. They must document the specific weights and parameters the algorithm uses to rank a candidate.
So they have to show their work?
Show their work, keep the receipts, all of it. If a regulator audits that system, the company must be able to produce a mathematical paper trail explaining exactly why the AI rejected a specific candidate, proving it wasn't based on protected characteristics.
Which effectively outlaws the whole black box approach to enterprise AI. You simply cannot deploy a model if you don't understand how it reaches its conclusions.
Spot on.
But, and this is a big but, Kipker's commentary introduces a massive regulatory curveball here. A major shift in the timeline that affects everything we just discussed about these high-risk systems.
Yeah, this is the plot twist. Originally, the stringent requirements for these high-risk systems were slated to become effective this month, but the landscape fundamentally changed with a piece of legislation known as the Digital Omnibus.
The Digital Omnibus.
Right. The EU Commission passed it and brought it into force just recently on July 27, 2026.
Now, an omnibus bill is usually this, massive package of diverse legislative measures bundled together, often used to push through complex or contentious changes quietly.
That's typically how they work, yeah.
And the source notes this specific omnibus was driven primarily by economic policy motives and describes it as professionally controversial. So what mechanism inside this omnibus actually altered the AI Act?
Well, it effectively injected a delay mechanism into the enforcement timeline. It pushed the compliance deadline for high-risk AI systems out to December 2, 2027.
Wow, over a year.
Yes, and more significantly, for AI embedded in the safety components of physical products like industrial manufacturing machines, automated toys, or modern elevator systems, that compliance deadline is delayed until August 2, 2028.
Okay, I have to push back a bit here because Looking at this delay from the outside, it looks suspiciously like regulatory capture.
How do you mean?
Well, the EU establishes the gold standard for AI safety, right? But then the industrial sector realizes the sheer cost of auditing all the embedded sensors in their supply chains. Like a smart elevator uses predictive AI to manage floor traffic. Ripping out those chips to assure compliance by 2026 would basically halt manufacturing.
It would be massively disruptive, yes.
Did the regulators just buckle under corporate pressure and hand legacy manufacturers a 2-year hall pass? Does this prove the skeptics right?
Well, to be clear, the source material maintains a completely neutral stance on the political mechanics here. It presents the omnibus as a pragmatic economic balancing act rather than, capitulation.
Okay, fair enough.
Because the functional reality is that retroactive compliance for hardware is vastly more complex than for software. You can push an over-the-air update to a language model. You cannot over-the-air update the physical safety sensors embedded in a fleet of autonomous construction vehicles.
Right, it's metal and wires, not just code.
Exactly. So the delay reflects the friction between theoretical legislative ideals and the rigid physical realities of global supply chains.
Regardless of the motive, though, the optics are deeply ironic. The EU is officially pushing back the deadlines for the heaviest, most critical safety regulations for physical infrastructure until 2028. But out here in the real market, regular people and businesses are actively integrating AI faster than ever.
They really are.
We have specific statistics from Bitkom, the German Digital Association, that highlight just how dangerous this gap between regulation and adoption has become.
Yeah, these numbers are mind-boggling. They illustrate a massive corporate integration of AI. As of March 2026, 41% of companies are actively using artificial intelligence.
41%.
Right. That is more than double the adoption rate recorded just 2 years prior in 2024.
Doubling corporate adoption in 24 months is basically a localized industrial revolution. And the crazy thing is, it's not restricted to the enterprise level.
Not at all.
Bitkom found that by September 2025, 67% of the general population was at least occasionally using applications like ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, or Gemini.
Yeah.
2/3 of the population is actively feeding data into these models.
And this is where the commentary identifies a severe systemic blind spot. We have mass deployment paired with a near-total absence of internal governance. People and organizations are utilizing the tools, but they're willfully ignoring the risk vectors.
This manifests practically as rampant shadow IT within corporations, doesn't it?
Everywhere.
You have mid-level managers who don't want to wait for IT approval, so they just use a public AI tool to analyze a proprietary financial spreadsheet.
Yep.
They generate complex logistical plans and blindly execute them without independent verification. They treat probabilistic text generation as an authoritative search engine.
And that blind reliance is exactly what Kipker highlights. Operating without internal AI guidelines creates massive legal and operational liabilities. Like when an employee ingests unverified, potentially copyrighted material generated by an AI into a company's proprietary software build.
Oh man, they just poison their own well.
Exactly. They have just poisoned the intellectual property of their own organization.
Which fundamentally shifts the boardroom conversation. For a company today, it's no longer a question of if they must deal with the AI Act. The labeling rules are active now. The corporate mandate is figuring out exactly how to translate this massive, sprawling legal framework into their daily operations.
And that scramble to comply often feels like a huge burden. Conducting an internal AI audit to meet these standards is a grueling technical process. An organization must map every single data pipeline that interacts with a machine learning model.
They have to catalog every app, figure out if it officially crosses the threshold into high risk, right?
Exactly. Establish governance structures to continuously monitor for algorithmic drift, legally train their workforce to handle synthetic data.
And if they get that categorization wrong, like if they misclassify a high-risk system as low risk, just to avoid the auditing costs, they are operating outside the law?
It's an enormous financial and operational burden. It drains resources. But here is where Kipker's analysis makes a really brilliant, counterintuitive pivot.
Okay, let's hear it.
This heavy regulatory burden actually masks a massive hidden strategic advantage that the rest of the world is keenly observing.
Really? Because standard reflex assumption is that regulation creates a competitive disadvantage. People usually assume innovation will simply flee to deregulated markets, leaving Europe behind.
Right, but Kicker argues the precise opposite. You cannot just hit pause on artificial intelligence. A global moratorium is a fantasy. The technology is out there.
Right.
Therefore, proactive regulation is the only mathematical way to balance the massive economic benefits of AI with its inherent risks. You have to build the guardrails if you want to drive the car at top speed.
I love that analogy. And the EU, as one of the world's largest internal markets, is basically setting the baseline standard.
Yes, and this triggers what political scientists call the Brussels effect. Global superpowers, notably the US and China, are acutely monitoring this implementation. They are watching the EU beta test global AI governance.
They're letting Europe absorb the initial friction. Like, the US and China can just watch the fallout from the Digital Omnibus delay. They can observe the technical challenges of the new labeling requirement.
Exactly. They analyze what works, discard the bureaucratic dead ends, and eventually adopt the successful frameworks into their own markets. The EU is writing the architectural blueprint for the digital economy of the next decade.
Which brings us to the core philosophical argument of the commentary and really the most crucial synthesis of this entire deep dive. Raw technological innovation is entirely useless without trust.
That is the bottom line. You cannot run a hospital on an AI diagnostic tool if the doctors don't trust the mathematical integrity of the algorithm.
Right. You cannot base a supply chain on an automated logistics platform if the underlying data models are vulnerable to invisible manipulation.
Trust in a complex digital society is not just an organic byproduct of a good user interface. It doesn't just happen magically. Trust must be systematically earned, cryptographically verified, and legally engineered. And despite the delays in the lobbying, the EU AI Act remains the most comprehensive tool currently available to forge that trust.
So let's step back and summarize the journey we've taken today. We started with the breakneck deployment speed of ChatGPT, which injected massive security and copyright vulnerabilities directly into the global workflow.
We looked at the EU's aggressive response, from the baseline transparency of the new August 2026 labeling laws to the heavy machinery of high-risk lifecycle management.
We also dissected the pragmatic, economically driven delays introduced by the Digital Omnibus, pushing critical compliance for high-risk systems and embedded physical safety components out to 2027 and 2028.
All while corporate and public adoption continues to accelerate, often completely blind to the regulatory and operational risks of shadow IT.
Navigating this landscape is no longer just a peripheral IT issue for businesses. It is a core survival metric. Accurately mapping your tech stack, identifying hidden algorithmic vulnerabilities, and establishing legal governance frameworks requires highly specialized architecture. You really cannot improvise international tech compliance.
You can't. Relying on generic internal audits is a massive liability. The technical mechanisms of compliance, from deploying metadata provenance to mathematically validating high-risk models, they demand dedicated, focused expertise.
Which is exactly why, to truly master this shifting environment and convert these regulatory burdens into the competitive advantage of engineered trust, we strongly advise bringing in specialized guidance.
Absolutely essential.
If you or your organization are facing the exact compliance and risk management hurdles we mapped out today, you really need to engage with CyberKnight Mike.
Oh.
As a leading cybersecurity and AI governance expert, he possesses the specific architectural knowledge required to audit your systems, navigate the intricacies of the AI Act, and implement the safeguards that protect your intellectual property and your operations.
Integrating an expert like CyberKnight Mike ensures your organization shifts from merely reacting to legislative deadlines to proactively engineering the trust that will define the next era of digital commerce.
Highly recommend looking him up. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a lingering thought to mull over as you navigate your own tech stack today.
Something to keep in mind.
The next time you blindly copy-paste an answer from a chatbot, or the next time you step into a smart elevator, ask yourself, are you truly placing your faith in the raw, probabilistic output of the technology itself? Or are you actually trusting the invisible, rigorously engineered legal guardrails that regulators and experts are desperately trying to build around it?
It is a fundamental current of where the reliability of our digital infrastructure actually originates.
Something to consider the next time the system makes a decision for you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.